Have you ever stopped and wondered why certain things are illegal? Not just what the laws are, but on what basis society gets to draw that line in the first place. Today, we're going to dig into the philosophy behind why something becomes a crime.
I mean, really, why can't you just do whatever you feel like? It's a simple question, but it gets right to the heart of this huge debate, that constant tug of war between your personal freedom and the rules that we all have to live by. So where do we draw that line?
So let's start by framing this whole issue as the liberty dilemma. We all value our freedom, but we also kind of need some order, right? How do you possibly justify taking away one to get the other? Okay, first, let's get a key term on the table: criminalization. All this really means is the process of society saying, okay, this specific action, it's now against the rules. And if you do it, there are going to be consequences. And this right here is the crucial point. Taking away someone's freedom, even in a small way, is a very big deal. That means the reason for doing it can't just be because you don't like something. The justification for any law has to be rock solid. The bar is set super high. So how do we meet that high bar? Well, for centuries, one of the most powerful and honestly most popular answers has been a theory called the harm principle. It's often seen as this really simple, elegant solution to our whole dilemma. And here it is. In a nutshell, the harm principle basically says that the only legitimate reason to make something a crime is because that action causes harm to other people. That's it. It's not about what's weird or unpopular. It's just about stopping people from getting hurt. The most famous champion of this idea was the philosopher John Stuart Mill, and this quote just nails it. The government's power should only ever be used as a shield to protect people from each other, nothing more. So, in theory, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? And where the harm principle really seems to shine is when we apply it to the most obvious, clear-cut crimes. I mean, just think about it. This is where it feels so intuitive. Why is murder illegal? Well, duh, it causes the ultimate harm. Theft, you're harming someone by taking their property. For these core, no-brainer crimes, the harm principle is a perfect fit. It's direct, it's clear, and it just makes sense. But what happens when the harm isn't so black and white? You know, the real test of any big theory isn't in the easy cases. It's in the messy, gray areas. And this is exactly where we start to see some cracks appear in the idea. Just take a look at these two columns. On the left, you've got obvious, direct harm. No debate there. But on the right, things get a lot fuzzier, don't they? Driving without insurance doesn't directly harm anyone until an accident happens. And selling an energy drink to a teenager, is that really a harm that justifies making a law? All of a sudden, this simple principle feels a lot less certain. And this question really gets to the core of the problem. The harm principle seems to throw all harms into the same big bucket, but our gut tells us there's a world of difference between murder and a traffic violation. So, can one simple idea really be enough to justify laws against both? This leads us to the next stage in the whole debate. Maybe the problem isn't with the principle itself, but with the idea that just causing harm is the only thing that matters. Maybe we need a little more nuance. And this is where thinkers like Joel Feinberg come into the picture. He looked at the harm principle and was basically like, hang on a second. It's a good start, but it's not the whole story. He argued that just because something is harmful, that doesn't automatically mean it should be a crime. So, the crucial point Feinberg made is that we have to ask more questions. How serious is the harm, really? How big is the risk? And what are the actual chances of that harm even happening? If you think about driving uninsured, the gravity of a potential accident is high, for sure, but the probability of it happening on any one trip is pretty low. This adds these much-needed layers to the whole conversation. And then you've got this whole other can of worms. What I think is harmful, you might just shrug at. We can all agree on murder, but what about that energy drink? Some people would see that as a serious health risk to minors, a clear harm. Others might see it as a total non-issue. The very definition of harm can be really subjective. So we've seen that harm is a pretty tricky concept. How severe is it? How likely is it? Can we even agree on what it is? All these questions really start to show the limits of the harm principle on its own. And that forces us to consider a completely different justification for our laws. When the idea of harm just isn't enough to justify a law, you're forced to look for another reason. If a law isn't about preventing direct harm, what else could it possibly be about? This brings us to a totally different theory. legal moralism. This idea argues that some things should be illegal simply because they're considered immoral, period. It doesn't matter if anyone gets hurt. The whole purpose of the law shifts from protecting people to enforcing a moral code.
And so this is where the debate leaves us. The harm principle is powerful, it's elegant, but it clearly has its limits. And that forces us to ask a much bigger and maybe much more uncomfortable question. Should our laws be in the business of enforcing morality? And if they are, whose morality gets to become the law?